Hey there! Welcome to Uncovering Our Hidden History. My name is Anna, and in today's video we are wrapping up our Kingdom of Israel and Tartaria and the Americas series. This is part 7, and it's going to be all things questions and answers, so stay tuned. Okay, y'all, are you ready to get started? I need to apologize. I am so very sorry. I'm a couple of days late getting this video out, and unfortunately I had a very close dear friend pass 3 or 4 days ago, and she'd been struggling with a long-term illness for a long time, so it wasn't a huge shock, but it's never easy nonetheless, and so I really needed to take a couple of days to just to grieve her. So anyway, that's why this is a little bit later for me to get this out. So, but I just wanted to let you know, and so let's go ahead and get started. We'll jump right in. Okay, let's pull up my PowerPoint. Okay, so part 7, wrap up and Q&A. We're going to go over the questions first, and we had lots and lots of questions about the haplogroups, the E1 haplogroups, and so it's like, wow, these are some great questions, and so I really went digging. I wanted to make sure that, because there did seem to be quite a bit of confusion, so I wanted to try to dig a little bit deeper and see if I could get more of a definitive answer on that, and so that's what I did. And then we've got some other things. I've got some other surprises for you near the end. So let's go ahead and get into answering some of those questions. Okay, so I want to show a little bit more proof for the Jewish people not being the chosen people, right? And giving a little bit more proof as to where they came from, because the part 6 I did with the DNA, it stirred up a hornet's nest, and I had couple of very angry Jewish people who were very unhappy with me and demanded that I apologize and set things straight. And so when I dug a little bit more to find out exactly, what they thought I messed up, I just realized that I had hit up against that programming and what they have been trained to believe. And so I want to go a little bit deeper here and show some more proofs. Again, none of this stuff is mine. I'm just like going out and finding it. These are proofs from others and evidence, and so I'm just trying to bring those together. But I warned you guys in part 1 that cognitive dissonance was a real thing, and you will know that you've been triggered when you can go from your logical brain and be into that emotional brain within just a few seconds, and just flaming your hair's on fire. So I just want to go over this again, just in case they happen to be watching this video, or we have any other Jewish friends that come in here and are completely confused. So I want to show you where Zionism came from. And I also want to make a point before I jump into this, okay? Jewish people I'm mainly speaking to the Hebrew Israelite people in here. Okay, just like not every white person is bad or evil, which I'm hoping most of you in here understand that. Not every Jewish person is bad either. But I will say it's a lot easier to speak with the secular Jewish people because they're not typically religious, and so they're not into the whole we're superior because we're the chosen people. But I need you to understand this is a program. This is a program, and the regular everyday Jewish people like you and I, okay, they have been told this. They have been programmed and brainwashed since probably their great-grandparents, maybe great-great-grandparents, since the early 1900s. This has been told. So while those of you who are descendants of the Hebrew Israelites, what happened with you guys is your whole history was stripped. You were stripped of your history. You were stripped of knowing where you came from. You were stripped of so many things. But for the Jewish people, they were intentionally programmed by their Zionist leaders. You're the chosen people. So I want you to think for just a minute, just, in your head, take a step back. You have to understand, like, if you had heard the same programming for, your great-grandparents, and then your grandparents, and then your parents, and then in your schools and in your community, and then especially if you live in the state of Israel, if you've been hearing for all of those years that, what is that? That's, a little over 100 years. If this has been put out, that the Jewish people are the chosen people, right? Especially if they are religious, Jewish people, that's programming. And so if you try to show them otherwise, it just inflames the issue. So what I really want to make sure that all of you, anybody watching this, understands, the Jewish people, we're not bagging on the Jewish people. I know several Jewish people that I've met, mostly secular ones, and they are lovely. They're pleasant, they're humorous, they're very nice people. So it's not the everyday Jewish people that have done the things that we're going to talk about. It's the Zionists. We have to be very specific. Just like, we're always talking about the elites and the controllers. Well, the Zionists fit in with that. Okay, so I felt the need that I need to put that out there because we need to have a little bit of compassion, for the fact that they've been programmed. And what I liken it to is, as a genealogist, there are times like if I'm dealing with clients and they, want to take a DNA test, for example, I have to warn them. I have to warn them and say, okay, you need to understand that there's risks associated with this, because sometimes, in addition to finding out what your ethnicities are, or are not, sometimes you find other things, like maybe your dad isn't your dad. The man that raised you your whole life isn't actually your dad. And in this instance, with the Jewish people, when all this blows up and comes out one day, which I do believe that it will, it's like being raised by a mom and dad, and they're the only mom and dad you've ever known, and then you take a DNA test and you find out that they're not your parents, right? And your whole existence is a sham. Like, what's real? I've been lied to my entire life. What is my identity? What is my history? Where are my people? This is what it's going to be like for them. So let's just show some humility and some compassion and realize that, it's not the Jewish people themselves. It's the elite Zionists. So talking about that, now this is a picture of Theodor Herzl. Okay, he was born in 1860. He died in 1904, and he was the founder of the political form of Zionism. Okay, so Zionism was birthed in the Ukraine. Surprise, surprise, that the Ukraine's been in the news a lot the past, couple years. And Zionism was birthed there in 1898 under the leadership of Theodor Herzl. So these political Zionists were the perpetrators of the whole chosen people identity theft. Okay? And again, they were Judaic converts who wanted a Jewish homeland. And they had their sights set on Palestine. So the picture to the right is, I think, one of their first world councils. And you can see they've got his picture up there. Now, regarding the Ukraine, so this little thing is going to be hard to read, but if you just did a Google search for Internet Encyclopedia of Ukraine, that will come up, and then you can see at the top, I found this to be very interesting. The crest of Ukraine is the same crest as the Khazarian Tamga. So to me, that says that when we're dealing with the Ukraine, we're most likely dealing with the majority of the Khazarians after the kingdom of Khazar was destroyed by the Mongols. I think that was the 1400s. They fled. Their kingdom was destroyed, and so they fled into the Crimea. They fled into Belarus. They fled into all over Eastern Europe, Russia, Poland, and so this area that became Ukraine it sounds like they might have set up shop there. Okay, these are the main Zionist perpetrators. We have Chaim Weissman, Jacob Schiff, Justice Louis Brandeis. He was the Supreme Court judge, one of the Supreme Court judges here in America. And we've got, I think his name is Yitzhak Gruenbaum, and he says, one cow in Palestine is worth more than all the Jews in Poland. So you have to understand the Zionists are the elites. They could care less about the Jewish people. They view them as cattle, just like they view us as cattle, right? So they really have no allegiance even to the Jewish people. They only have allegiance to the other Zionists. So they don't care. And they don't mind using them to their own advantage to accomplish their overall goals. Okay, and then the bottom one, this is Samuel Untermeyer. Very, very sleazy Jewish lawyer. And we'll get more into that when we actually get into the history of the Jewish people. And I can let you know what he did. So, but he says this economic boycott is our means of self-defense. President Roosevelt has advocated its use in the National Recovery Administration. So, all of these people had their hands involved in American politics and everything in government. Okay, so now the three men that I'm showing on here, Shlomo Sands, he was a Jewish historian writer, Arthur Kessler, Jewish scholar and writer, and then Benjamin Friedman, and he was a Jewish historian and scholar. So each of those gentlemen wrote books, and Shlomo Sands this is a quote from his book. He says, "How can we return to Israel when we, the Jewish people, were never there to begin with?" Benjamin Friedman, okay, he was a very interesting man. He was born into high Jewish society. His family was very, very wealthy, and he was the heir to the Woodbury Soap Company was his family's business. And he also was in government as well. And I think his biography said he dealt with or worked with 7 presidents throughout his long career. And while he was working in government, he began to see what the international Zionists were doing and how they were meddling in American politics and other things. And he gave a speech at the Willard Hotel in Washington in 1961. And then he wrote 2 books. If you look in the left corner, his one book is Zionism, The Hidden Tyranny. And then he also wrote the blue book, which Facts Are Facts. And there's just a little excerpt underneath of how he talks about that. And again, we know that Jesus is not the correct term because that's a Jewish name. But everyone has been programmed, right? And he says, inscribed upon the cross when Yeshua was crucified were the Latin words, Jesus Nazarenus Rex Iudarum. And he says Pontius Pilate was the author of that famous inscription. And I'm not going to read all of that. And then he just said that authorities competent to translate and pass upon the correct translation into English agree that the Latin phrase actually read Jesus the Nazarene, or Yeshua the Nazarene, ruler of the Judeans. There is no disagreement among them that the word Jew did not occur anywhere in the English language until the 18th century, which would be the 1700s. Yeshua referred to himself as a Judean. The modern day JEWSs were historically Khazars, a Mongolian Nordic tribe who roamed throughout Northern Europe. And so he's quoted as saying that in one of his books. And he was so disgusted by what he saw some of his own people doing, he ended up accepting Messiah and becoming a Christian. And he spent his entire what's it called? I'm so sorry. Inheritance, financial inheritance, trying to educate people, trying to publish the books, speaking, doing everything he could to warn the Christian churches of what was happening, because the Zionists were also then moving into the churches and putting forth the propaganda that these were the chosen people, and they were deceiving the Christians. And so he spent the remainder of his life trying to warn people. And so those are really good books to get a hold of. And then, of course, I talked about Arthur Kessler on the last video. And he says, and that's a little bit tiny for me to read, so I printed out my sheet. So this is a quote from in his book. He says, on this problem, he says, what is in dispute is the fate of the Jewish Khazars after the destruction of their empire in the 12th or 13th century. On this problem, the sources are scant, but various late medieval Khazar settlements are mentioned in the Crimea, in the Ukraine, in Hungary, Poland, and Lithuania. The general picture that emerges from these fragmentary pieces of information is that a migration of Khazar tribes and communities into those regions of Eastern Europe, mainly Russia and Poland, were at the dawn of the modern age the greatest concentrations of Jews that were found. This has led several historians to conjecture that a substantial part, and perhaps the majority, of Eastern Jews, and hence of world Jewry, might be of Khazar and not Semitic origin. Now remember, he published this in 1957. Okay? And he himself was a secular Jew. And Kessler then, but he was also a historian. And so that book is, I've read that book and it's very thorough. Kessler then stated, after quoting Dr. Antal's commentary, he says, the far-reaching implication of this hypothesis may explain the great caution that is exercised by historians in approaching this subject, if they don't avoid it altogether, right? Because even then in 1957, they didn't want the backlash. He goes on to write, how important in quantitative terms is that presence of the Caucasian sons of Japheth in the tents of Shem? One of the most radical propounders of the hypothesis concerning the Khazar origins of Jewry is the professor of medieval Jewish history at Tel Aviv University, A.N. Poliak. His book, which was in Hebrew, called Khazaria, was published in 1944. Okay, so 4 years before the state of Israel was given Palestine. So he published his book Khazaria in Hebrew in 1944 in Tel Aviv, and a second edition again in 1951. In his introduction, he writes that the facts demand a new approach, both to the problem of the relations between the Khazar Jewry and other Jewish communities, and to the question of how far we can go in regarding this Khazar Jewry as the nucleus of the large Jewish settlement in Eastern Europe. The descendants of this settlement, those who stayed where they were and didn't, move, also those who immigrated to the United States and to other countries, and then also those who went to Israel. They now constitute the large majority of world Jewry. Kessler then writes, this, Poliak's book, was written before the full extent of the Holocaust was known, but that does not alter the fact that the large majority of surviving Jews in the world is of Eastern European, and thus perhaps mainly Khazar origin. If so, this would mean that their ancestors came not from the Jordan River, but from the Volga River, not from Canaan, but from the Caucasus, once believed to be the cradle of the Aryan race, and that genetically they are more closely related to the Hun, the Uyghur, and the Magyar tribes than to the seed of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Should this turn out to be the case, then the term anti-Semitism would become void of meaning, based on a misapprehension shared by both the killers and their victims. And then he says, the story of the Khazar Empire, as it slowly emerges from the past, begins to look like the cruelest hoax which history has ever perpetrated. That is pretty telling, pretty sobering. And it's interesting that even back when he was writing this, it sounds like the historians were tiptoeing around this very carefully. Because anytime anyone dared question, you have to understand during this time, if anyone dared question, the Zionists would throw out the anti-Semitism, you're an anti-Semite, right? And so that's, what they would do if they were questioned or anything tried to be brought to light. Okay, then we have Henry Ford. He was not a Jew, but he began to notice. So he was founder and owner of the Ford Motor Company, and he began to notice or get wind of the fact that somebody was trying to steal his company. There were some strange things going on, and so he hired several private detectives to look into it. And what they reported back, he printed, and he had a newsletter called the Dearborn Independent within his company. He had his own printing company. And so he would publish their findings in the Dearborn Independent. And come to find out, he had a Jewish man working within his company who was a Zionist. And the international Jews were little by little trying to usurp his company and take it over from within. And so all of those letters that were in the Dearborn Independent, a dear friend of his, after many years after the fact, published them in a book. You can't really see it, but it's called The International Jew. And you might have a hard time finding that, but you can try like the online used book repositories like Alibreeze or maybe Thrift Book, Abe Books. Some of those might try Goodreads and see if you can possibly find it. It's very, very illuminating. And he basically says the same thing. He says the Jews were not descendants of the biblical Israelites, and he was very upset because, and this is the same thing that Benjamin Friedman was upset about. He says these Jews committing all sorts of crimes. But again, it's not the Jews; it was the Zionists. But I don't think people could really separate out at that time. So let's say it appropriately. These Zionists committing all sorts of crimes while under the cover of being called the chosen people of the Bible. Okay. So many people, we're talking like the A.N. Polian book was 1944. So like from the mid 40s through the 1960s, so many people, and especially secular Jews, were speaking out about this. But this just goes to show that all it takes is one or two generations, especially if those books are hidden away and nobody knows. Okay, so which kind of makes me touch on something else. Many of us had an awakening, or in 2020, and I firmly am 100% convinced that the Most High pulled a veil back, because there was all this evil, all this stuff happening. We just were like, I don't know if it was spells, witchcraft, or we were just all blinded. So the Most High, even though 2020 was a really hard year for all of us, we were given a gift in that the veil was pulled back and everything was exposed, right? And so, and also about the same time, a lot of the hidden books, a lot of the old books, the hidden books like this, started coming back into circulation. And there were some independent publishers that started reprinting some of these old books as well. So, and I will say this, I just have a gut feeling that as we continue to go forward, that window is going to close. And I think those books are going to start to disappear again. And so, in my opinion, if at all possible, I just want to recommend, make sure you guys have scriptures and the extra biblical books and the Apocrypha books and some of these old books. get them now while you can. And if you can find them online, like archive.org, a lot of those books you can actually download as a PDF to your computer, because I think this window of opportunity we have, I don't think it's going to stay open forever. And again, all it takes is 1 or 2 generations, and all this information is lost. So it's going to end up being like contraband, in my opinion. Okay, now this one surprised me. This is Colonel Curtis B. Dahl, and he married into FDR, the Roosevelt family. Franklin Delano Roosevelt had a daughter named Anna Roosevelt, and Curtis B. Dahl, they got married, but things didn't work out. They ended up getting divorced, but later on, I imagine it was probably not a real fun family to be a part of, but he was made privy to a lot of inside information, and he wrote the book called Israel's $5 trillion Secret. And so he says, Israel, the greatest hoax of the last centuries. So we're seeing all these independent people speaking out about this. Okay, now in the last video, part 6, I dropped a couple links to DNA studies on the Ashkenazi Jews, but I also wanted, this came out in Ynet News, Jewish World, on February 5th, 2013. Okay. DNA tests started coming out really about that time as well, and it wasn't as advanced as it is now, but I just found this very interesting. So it's the publishing company's called, or the online company's called ynetnews.com, Jewish World, and it says, debate on European Jews' origin settled? Question mark. The gene study says that the Jews of European descent are of mixed ancestries, with many hailing from tribes in the Caucasus who converted to Judaism and created an empire that lasted half of a millennium. It says the investigation, its author says, should settle a debate that has been roiling for more than 2 centuries. Jews of European descent, often called Ashkenazim, there we go, account for some 90% of the more than 13 million Jewish people in the world today. 90%. So that would mean that the other 10% would be made up of the Sephardic Judeans and the Portuguese and the Ethiopian Judeans. That's all they make up, 10%. The other 90% are the AJs and Khazars. According to the so-called Rhineland hypothesis, Rhineland was the older name for Germany. The AJs descended, according to the Rhineland hypothesis, the AJs descended from Jewish people who progressively fled Palestine after the Muslim conquest of 638 AD. So this is how the Zionists were trying to spin this, that they were just another, that they were originally from the southern kingdom of Judah, and they had to flee after the Muslim conquest of 638 AD, and they fled Palestine, right? And then they settled in southern Europe, and then in the late Middle Ages, about 50,000 of them moved from Rhineland in Germany into Eastern Europe, according to the hypothesis. But detractors say this idea is implausible. Barring a miracle, which some supporters of the Rhineland hypothesis have in fact suggested, the scenario would have been demographically impossible. It would mean that the population of Eastern European Jews leapt from 50,000 in the 15th century to around 8 million at the start of the 20th century. that birth rate would have been 10 times greater than that of the local non-Jewish population. And it would have occurred despite economic hardship, disease, wars, and pogroms that ravaged the Jewish communities. So it just goes on. It talks about seeking new light in the argument. A study published in the British Journal called Genome Biology and Evolution compares the genomes of 1,287 unrelated individuals who hail from 8 Jewish and 74 non-Jewish populations. And so it goes down. And I will make sure that I leave the link for this because it's very tiny. I know that. And then on the second page, it just talks about how that there's archaeological findings also that kind of debunk that. So again, I'll make sure that I leave the link to that article in the description. So if you want to go there and check it out yourself, you can do that. So again, the reason I took the time to do this was because, as I said, I had apparently poked a Jewish hornet's nest, and I had some very unhappy persons. And so again, what do I always say? I can say anything all day long, but if I show you, a picture is worth 1,000 words. Okay, now moving on. It seems that my little tree that I created, trying to be helpful, brought a lot of confusion, and I want to apologize for that. That was not my intent. The little tree I made showing Adam at the base and Noah and the branches, okay, this tree, it was only meant to be used as an example to explain the difficult concept of clades, subclades, and mutations, how they worked. And so, because I had some people messaging me saying, well, are you saying that Shem was from E3 and there's that and that? And I realized after the fact that I should have issued that, I should have said that up front, that don't follow the tree. This is just meant to be an example of how the main branches start out, and then there's sub branches from that. And then when mutations occur, there's more little branches. But I should have said don't follow exactly how I've put the little haplogroup. So I want to make sure I explain this for anybody else that watches part 6, that don't follow the tree. That's only meant to be an example. Follow the world map haplogroup, the world map of Y DNA haplogroup, which I have to the right with the arrow pointing. That is what the geneticists put out. That is not mine. That is not my document. That is what the geneticists put out. And I can only give you what the geneticists put out. Yeah. Okay. So our first question, she says, thank you for another well-prepared presentation. Question, are you able to provide more information on the mitochondrial DNA for haplogroup LO? So did a little bit deeper digging, so I have a couple things to show you for that. So if you look at the chart below, that with the blue box, look where I've put the red rectangle. So Y DNA haplogroup is the most ancient. It's A. It's what we call Y chromosome atom. So the mitochondrial, the female companion to that would be LO. And it says that its geographical area and or peoples were Eastern and Southern Africa, which pretty much shows that that's the same thing on the haplogroup. Now, I also found this for you. So it says that, and again, we don't get into the timeline millions of years ago or 300 and 50,000 years ago, okay? It just says that the LO is one of two branches from the most recent common ancestor, we call that MRCA, MRCA, for the shared human maternal lineage. The haplogroup consists of 5 main branches: LOA, LOB, LOD, LOF, LOK. 4 of them were originally classified into L1 subclades. And then it says, in 2014, ancient DNA analysis of a 2,330-year-old male, which that's more doable. He's a male forager, apparently, in southern Africa. I don't know that they foraged. They were not cave people. Found that the specimen belonged to LOD2C1C, on and on. So anyway, you can read that for yourself, but it basically says that the possible place of origin, again, was South Africa or Southern East Africa for LO, and that the ancestor is L, which is mitochondrial Eve. And then it also said LO is found most commonly in also sub-Saharan Africa. It reaches its highest frequency in the Khoisan people at 73% on average. And then some of the other highest frequencies are in Namibia, South Africa, and Botswana. Okay, so hopefully that helps you for that question. That helps answer some things. Our next question is from, I'm so sorry if I say this wrong, a predicator. A predicator. He says, why is your Y-DNA tree, so again, I think I confused him with my tree, different than Nathaniel Jensen, who does research for the Answers in Genesis? In his chart, E1B1 is from Ham, not Shem. So I put this up here because, again, I do realize I confused people with my tree, but he's also incorrect, and I wanted to point this out. E1B1 is, I don't believe that is from Ham. So, but we'll get to that in a minute. So I do like Answers in Genesis. Like, they've done some really good work. I used them a lot when my children were little, and I was homeschooling them, and, we would talk about, a younger Earth and the dinosaurs and all of that. So they had some really, really, really good, helpful literature that we used. But so I looked into Dr. Nathaniel Jensen, and what caught my eyes, it says Dr. Jensen holds a PhD in cell and developmental biology. That's really cool, from Harvard University. But he serves as a research biologist. Okay. So then I pulled up this question because I wanted to be able to, so you guys could see it. I said, is a biologist and a geneticist the same field? So the answer was no. While a geneticist is considered a type of biologist, they are not exactly the same profession. A biologist, like Mr. Jansen, studies a broader range of life sciences, such as, cell replication and organisms and things like that, okay? But a geneticist specifically focuses on the study of genes, heredity, and genetic variation within organisms, essentially specializing in a specific area of biology. Okay, so again, a biologist studies all aspects of living organisms, including their structure, function, growth, origin, evolution, and distribution, whereas a geneticist focuses primarily on the study of genes, how they are inherited, and how they influence traits within organisms. So another way of saying it is, every geneticist who studies the chromosomes is a biologist. Okay? But not every biologist is a geneticist. The geneticist is one step up above that. So a predicator, I hope that answers your question. Number one, my tree, don't follow my Y-DNA tree, follow the world haplogroup tree. But because Mr. Jansen is not a geneticist, I think he should probably leave it to the geneticist to talk about the different haplogroups and just, stick to his specialty in biology. So that's what I would say to that. But I'm not knocking Answers in Genesis. They're a great organization. Okay. This person says, I took a DNA test back in 2016, and it showed that I belonged to the RM173 haplogroup. It also listed the place of origin for my ancestors and my haplogroup as Saudi Arabia. Saudi Arabia is a prominent nation of the Semitic people, and all of the maps for the land of Shem show it as the place. It doesn't make sense that Israelites would outnumber Hamites in their own land. E1B1A is so numerous in Africa that it would outnumber the Hamites. How is that possible if so many of our people were sold into slavery out of Africa, but we still outnumber them even to this day? It doesn't make sense. I'm just going to show you what I found on R1 M173, and then hopefully a little bit further down, maybe that question will be answered. So, haplogroup R for Y-DNA, okay, it says that possible place of origin, North Asia, Indian subcontinent, okay, Central Asia, or the Middle East. And then it gives the ancestor, I think that might be I'm not sure if that's a SNP or haplotype, or it's a clade. And then it says the descendants of haplogroup are RM173, R2, RM479. So I don't know. These haplogroups are getting more and more convoluted, and I don't know if that's just due to the size of the population and mutations coming about. I'm not sure. But so I did a little bit further digging on that one, and I found an interesting article from Clyde Ahmad Winters. And he says, in this paper, we discuss the role of the Cushites in the spread of R1 M173. Human Y chromosome haplogroup R1 M173 is mainly found in Africa. Haplogroup R1 M173 is the pristine form of haplogroup R. In Africa, researchers have detected frequencies as high as 95% among sub-Saharan Africans. The phylogenetic, craniometric, textual, and historical evidence, I guess, proves it. So if you look on the little map, it's basically showing, they're basically saying it started in Asia or around with the Kushite area, and then looks like maybe spread into Africa. I'm not sure if that's exactly what they're trying to say, but so it would seem that it's found in North Asia, the Indian subcontinent, which, again, remember that Abraham's second wife, Keturah, their children were all sent to India. I guess prior it was called Hindustan, and that's where they settled. So they are Semitic peoples, the original indigenous ones, because they descend from Abraham. But they're just not through Sarah. They're through Keturah. Okay, so, but just keep listening through the presentation, because regarding the number of Israelites outnumbering the Hamites in Africa, hopefully this will begin to make sense to you as we proceed on. Marshall says, basically what I was doing was Googling searches of haplogroups, and I couldn't find one with definitive answers about E1b being Shem. Lots of them actually say R1 or IJ, but I'm still learning and researching. So that's a great question. That's really good. But as we could see from the previous one, that R1 is also seems to be a Semitic haplogroup, also found in Africa as well as the other places mentioned. Vernon says, E1 isn't Shem. I can see if you're doing this as an example, but in all reality, E is Hamitic. J is Japheth, Javan, or Greece origins are haplogroup. They are J, and they are not Semites, nor did they break off. So, Vernon, just hang in there. We're going to move through this more, but they are in fact Shem. So I'm not exactly sure where you're getting your information regarding that E1 isn't Shem, but I'm going to show you proof that they are. So hang tight. And then the next one says Israelite DNA, he says, is E1 B1A, not E1 B1B. E1 B1A is seen predominantly in West and Southern Africa, which I agree, and in the African American community at large, according to genetic study. Bantu, Yoruba, Ibu, Lemba, Menda, Mendenka, Zulu, Xhosa, and Gadangwa, you and others, he says, are all E1B1A. These tribes have genetic similarity and have Israelite customs and have historical background to themselves being Israelites. So I think I would tend to agree with that, but that let's just keep moving on. So I wanted to kind of get to the bottom of this. So I don't know why I didn't remember, but about 2 years ago, I went into a mentorship program with some other genealogists under this woman. Her name is Diane Southard, and she wrote the book, Your DNA Guide, step-by-step plan, and then she now also has a workbook to go with it. So a couple of years ago, I entered her coaching or her mentorship program, where we were mentored by her and taught by her. There was different modules and things. So I thought, you know what? And I learned so much, and she is so friendly and so wonderful and helpful. And really, she's been doing this so many years, and she tries to make a very complicated subject easy to understand. And so I thought, you know what? I want to go see if Diane has anything on this subject. So I looked up her online book and or her blog, and she says, why DNA haplogroup E? And then she gets into E1B1B and E1B1A. And this is from November 2021. And she says, why DNA haplogroup E with subgroups or subclades E1B1B and E1B1A is the most common Y chromosome haplogroup in Africa. Explore its deep origins, variant names such as E-M2, E-M215, and E-V58, global spread to Europe and the Americas, and consider the best Y-DNA test for African origins. So she says the genetic heritage of Africa is unfathomably deep and fascinating, and I concur. I think there's a myth out there that everybody who lives in Africa are all from the same people and they all share the same DNA, and nothing could be further from the truth. It gets African DNA is very confusing. So she says haplogroup E is the most common Y chromosome clade in Africa. And it has made its way around to many other parts of the world too, both anciently and also with more modern migration. Haplogroup E is old, having emerged more than, I would not say 70,000 years ago, likely in East Africa, which concurs with the Y chromosome, the placing of the Y chromosome atom A. Today's descendants of this original ancient group remain highly concentrated in many regions of Africa, giving insight into the archaic movements of people on the continent. And blah, blah, blah. And she says the E is also the most common Y DNA haplogroup for current day African Americans in both North and South America. And then she gets more specifically, we're going to start with E1B1B, which also has, I don't know if these are, I still can't figure out why, if they're related to E1B1B, if it's a mutation, it might be a mutation, or just another subclade. But so with E1B1B, you'll might also come across EM215 or EM35. And she says one of its most common subbranches, called E1B1B, is defined by the SNP, which is a part of the chromosome, EM215. And these terms are often used synonymously. So, and she says E1B1B can also be referred to by another SNP called EM35. So the SNPs are just like sections on the chromosome, if I remember that correctly. And she says EM35 was discovered before EM215, and almost all people with the EM215 mutation also have EM3 mutation. The takeaway, all that to say, is that E1B1B as well as EM215 and EM35 are often used to loosely refer to the same Y haplogroup subbranch. Okay? On the African continent, EM215 is found at very high frequency in North Africa, approaching 80% prevalence in some areas across the region. In the Horn of Africa, not only is EM215 very frequently found in Ethiopia and Somalia, but a high number of different subvariations of the group are found locally too, suggesting this area is a place of ancient origin for the group. She says limited southward migration brought EM215 to isolated populations in South Africa. And then she also talks about how EM215 spread through possible maritime routes. Okay, now let's see what she says about E1B1A. She says haplogroup subbranch E1B1A is an ancient brother to E1B1B, but has left a completely different fingerprint on the world today. These branches split from one another, however many years ago, in the Horn of Africa, followed by the emergence of prominent SNP mutation EM2, which gained footing there. She says the SNP mutation that actually defines E1B1A is called EV38, but the vast majority of its members belong to the subbranch defined EM2. E1B1A is often referred to by the SNP name EM2, so they're synonymous, rather than EV38, even though EM2 defines its major subbranch. She says today EM2 or E1B1A is the most common and diversified haplogroup in West Africa, and also has moderate prominence in Central Africa, the African Great Lakes region, and in South Africa. And she says, a well-recognized event called the Bantu expansion spread its language and also genetic characteristics from North Africa through an east-west corridor and also south in two waves of migration. Okay, so blah, blah, blah. But you can see from the map where she's saying these went. So she's saying that it originated in East Africa and then went up, and then she's showing that E1B1A with that snip of M2 goes right into West Africa, but then there's also some that went down into South Africa as well. And then she says EM2 also moved anciently into the Middle East and Mediterranean island groups, seen today in low frequencies in some of these communities, around a 1 to 2% occurrence. The transatlantic slave trade also brought EM2 to the Americas, beginning 400 years ago, with the strong predominance of this haplogroup in West Central Africa, where many of the embarkments took place, right? Along, where the Gold Coast and the Slave Coast. And many enslaved men bore the EM2 genetic signature and brought it to different parts of the Americas. So you can reference that map at the bottom. Okay. Okay. Now, I found this interesting as well. When I was also searching, this is from the Brit Am discussion group. On the sons of Ham and Shem. So this person's talking about haplogroup E, Y-DNA, and he says most members of haplogroup E belong to one of its already identified subclades, E1A and E2, are found almost exclusively in Africa. E1B1A is the most prevalent subclade of E in Africa. It is observed at high frequencies in all African regions except the northernmost and easternmost portions of the continent. So that kind of verifies and goes hand in hand with what Diane was saying. He says E1B1B is found at high frequencies in East Africa and North Africa, which is also what Diane said. And it is the only subclade that is also found in Europe and Asia at significant frequencies. E1B1B is common among Afro-Asiatic speakers in Africa, as well as among Nilo-Saharan and Niger-Congo speakers in East Africa and the Sudan. E1B1B is less common in West, Central, and Southern Africa. And then he talks a little bit about paragroup E among the Bantu-speaking males. So you guys can read through that. And then down near the bottom, he says, today there are two main surviving branches of this haplogroup, E1B1B, which its SNP is EM215, and then E1B1A, which is EV38. So he basically is confirming everything that Diane said. And again, he says E1B1A is the primary subclade of E in West Africans and many populations of Central, not Eastern, but Central, and or it should be, so this is varying a little bit, it should be West Africans and then some in Southern Africa. He says there might be lower frequencies in North Africa and parts of West Asia. It goes down, and then he says E1B1B is at once the most common E subclade among East African, Maasai, Somalia, Ethiopians, Eritreans, and North African Sudanese, Egyptians, Berbers, and Arabs. So, and then it is also found in also common in West Asia, where it spread into the Balkans and the rest of Europe. And then he gives the subclades for that. So hopefully you guys, that answers many of your questions. And I will put links to both Diane's article and then the Brit Am article in the description. So if you want to go check that out more, you can do that. Okay. This again is just going back over, giving a little bit more detail into how they split. And then he talks a little bit more about, he does mention the female LO, L1, and L4 being found most among the Bushmen, Khazar, and Pygmies. So anyway, I'm just going to let you guys read that and move on. So I think that, well, hold on just a second. So this is, I found this on an online site. It was done in 2017 by Razib Khan. And I will also link, but I did put the URL here, but I will also link it in the description for you. Basically, he's saying that the orange areas are Semitic, where Semitic language, or they're Semitic areas where Semitic language and practices are seen. And then the red areas are, he says, Berber, and then the aqua is Cushite or Cushitic, and then the green, what is it? You can barely see it. It's over in East Africa, but it's Omotic, and then the darker green is Chad. So this is it seems how, I mean, you've got a lot of groups going on here, and it gets very, very confusing because you've got Semites and Hamites all living on this continent. Which leads me to my next point. If you think about it anciently, and I know I've gotten so many comments, some emails about, I think that, the ancient Israelites were here, and I think they were in the Americas. No, I think that they were over here, and well, I think they were over there. So some of that, all of that may very well be true, but again, I ethically can only present on what I have researched, okay? So I'm not saying that's not true, and I'm not shutting the door on that. I can't speak to it because I haven't researched it. So until I get further information, for, at least for the time being, I have to go off, what has been put forth. And so if you look at the map on the left, the main belief among the Christian, in the Christian thought is that the Hamites were given Africa as their inheritance, right? And Shem and the Shemites basically had all of Eurasia. And then, of course, Japheth had the northern area and more of the, the European countries and such. So this is why I think everyone is so confused, especially the researchers and the geneticists, because they're just looking at where, these certain haplogroups and subclades and stuff are located, but they don't really, you have to understand, most people still do not know that the descendants of the biblical Hebrews were a melanated people, right? Now, we're told that Ham's descendants were the darkest, that they're described as being black as the tents of Kedar. So the Hamites are described as being a much darker people, but the Shemites, again, would be brownish black reddish brown. That color, reddish brown, actually is described in scripture as ready. It's a reddish brown. And so what, they're confused. They just don't know. They still think that the people in running the state of Israel right now are you guys. And so it's very confusing. So in their minds, they're thinking that it's just Ham's descendants, just Africans living over there. They don't understand that we've got Shem over there as well. And so I put a map to the right of the different groups over here. And again, they also don't understand, because they're scientists, they're geneticists, they're biologists, whatever. Many of them are not historical research. So many of them, it's not been widely advertised that after the destruction of Jerusalem, actually before the destruction of Jerusalem, as we're going to find out when we get into the Southern Kingdom series, many thousands of Judeans saw the writing on the wall, so to speak, and they fled. They fled out of Jerusalem and out of Judea, and they went to West Africa. Okay? So you've got Hamites and Shemites there, and everybody's confused. So it's no wonder that you guys yourselves are confused. But hopefully that helps a little bit. It does seem to be that E1B1A tends to be more primarily West Africa and somewhat into South Africa a little bit and Central. And then you predominantly see more of E1B1B, more Eastern and North, and more into the Middle East a bit there as well. But that's not saying there's no cross-pollination anywhere else. So if you're confused, just know that everybody else is as well, because they don't know who y'all are and that you went, that your ancestors went there. It's just going to take a while to sort all of this out. But I do have a little bit of a solution, a recommendation for you. So I've been hearing a lot. Even Diane talks about for African people, melanated people. I noticed that she was recommending a company called African Ancestry. And it says, if you are considering Y chromosome testing, and they also do mitochondrial. They don't do any autosomal at all, just only mitochondrial and Y DNA testing. It says, if you are considering Y chromosome testing with an eye specific to African heritage, consider the company African Ancestry, which hosts the largest database of African Y chromosome and mitochondrial DNA lineages, and they are 100% Black owned. They do not provide any autosomal testing, but they will trace both your paternal and maternal lines with specificity to 30 countries and several hundred ethnic groups. Okay, so then I went searching because I thought all these young ones, all these Gen Z and millennials on YouTube, they all love to do these, these DNA reveals. And so I went looking for ones that had done this African Ancestry. So I don't know if any of you are familiar with Sister Girl, and she's very cute. She's just got a very fun personality. So she was kind of comparing DNA. She did an autosomal DNA test through 23andMe, and I will say from experience, I find personally myself 23andMe to be probably the most pinpoint specific, and they will get into those trace regions as well. So her autosomal DNA through 23andMe came back that she is 78.7% West African, and broken down, 29% of that is Nigerian, 25% of that is Ghanaian, Liberian, and Sierra Leone. 12.2% of that is Senegambian and Guinea. 11.8% of that is broadly West Africa. And then she has like 8.4% of Congolese and Southern East. So that's her autosomal. So then she used African ancestry, and she tested her mother's mitochondrial DNA. So remember, as women, we don't have any Y DNA, right? We have two X's. So we can only test our mother's mitochondrial to do that. But now if you have a dad, as a woman, if you have a dad or you have brothers from your dad, you can maybe get them to do a Y-DNA test for you so you can get your father's, so you can see what your father's line is. So when she did her mother's mitochondrial tribe, they came back and said that her mother's female line traced to the Balanta people living in Guinea, Bissau, and the Temne people living in Sierra Leone. So what African ancestry does, they'll give you the specific tribes that your mitochondrial or your Y-DNA link to. And then she tested her father's mother's mitochondrial DNA, and her father's maternal side traced to the Bubi, I hope I'm saying that right, Bubi people living in Bioko Island, and Tikar Hausa and the Fulani people living in Cameroon. And then her dad got so excited by the results, he wanted to do the Y-DNA, so she bought him a test so that she could test her father's Y-DNA, and that came back as linking to the Kru people living in Liberia. So if you guys want to do your mitochondrial and your Y-DNA, you might want to do African ancestry, but they are pretty pricey. Their tests are much more pricey, but again, you're getting a lot more specificness down to the tribe. So I want to put that out there. Okay, now moving on, we're out of the DNA. I want to address a couple of things. I have had a handful of people, a couple of ladies that were very irritated with me because they said in the comments, the scriptures already told you where those northern tribes went. Like, even though I provided all the proofs showing that they went into Hala, Habor, and Gozan, right? They went into the cities of the Assyrians. And then from there, using Tobit, right, the Apocrypha book of Tobit, I showed that many of them left and went into the lands of Media because they knew the prophecies from Joel that Nineveh was going to be destroyed. And then when the Assyrians and the Medes went to war, they took advantage of that to get out, right? Now, one thing you have to understand, especially with migration, it's not like today where as a family group, we go, okay, you know what? We're going to move to South Carolina. Okay. Now, as a family group, you'll pack up your stuff. You've got vehicles, you've got, a U-Haul truck, and you can do that. It's very easy to move your household, relatively speaking. Back in the day, you didn't have that, right? You're either walking or maybe you've got camels or some caravans. But there's a genealogy term that we use called, friends and family network. And a lot of times, especially like in the pioneer times, when they're in covered wagons and horses and such, you would often see family members and their surrounding neighbors and the people in their community, like they might all pick up together and migrate to another place because, again, especially if you're in rural places, those surrounding neighbors become like family because a lot of times you're intermarrying with each other's children are intermarrying with one another. So if somebody wants to pick up and move or thinks they're going to move, you've got almost like a whole community, or you've got several families or friends or neighbors friends, family, neighbors. That's what it is. That they're all going to move together. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make here is they got irritated because they said, Scripture already told you where they were. So even though I proved that they ended up in Tartaria and then crossed over into America at a later date, I want to make the point that even though they might pick up and move in groups together, you guys, well, let me just read this. Okay, I'm getting ahead of myself. This is 2 Chronicles 11, and it says, so this is before, so the kingdoms are split. We're specifically talking about the northern kingdom of Israel, but they're still in the land. They haven't been removed yet by the Assyrians. Jeroboam has totally gone like total pagan, right? He's got 2 golden calves set up there. They're doing Baal worship. They're doing Moloch worship. He gets so bad that he kicks the Levites out and he institutes his own priests, because they'll do things like, he's just so apostate. But the Levites, they draw the line. They're not going to do the stuff he wants. So 2 Chronicles 11, starting in verse 13, tells us, and the priests and the Levites who were in all Israel presented themselves to him, to the king of Judah, which was Rehoboam. They presented themselves to him from all the places they lived. For the Levites left their common lands and their holdings, so they just picked up and left everything that they had there. And they came to the kingdom of Judah and Jerusalem, because Jeroboam and his sons had cast them out from serving as priests to the Most High. And he had appointed his own priests for the high places and for the goat idols and for the calves that he had made. And those who had set their hearts to seek the Most High of Israel came after them from all the tribes of Israel to Jerusalem to sacrifice to the Most High the Elohim of their fathers. They strengthened the kingdom of Judah. Okay? But not everybody in Israel picked up and left. Just the ones that were absolutely disgusted and could not abide by what, the more religious ones, the ones whose hearts were after, seeking after the Most High, they couldn't take it anymore. So they packed up, some of them, a remnant of them packed up and went with the Levites, and they went back down to Judah. So you have to understand that even though it's the kingdom of Judah, and you've mainly got the tribe of Judah and Benjamin there, the Levites then came back, and then a remnant from each of those other tribes, those other 10 tribes, came with them, and they lived in Judah. Okay, so the point I want to make here too is because I had a very kind, very nice man send me an email, and he identified himself as someone with the Ibu tribe in West Africa. And he thanked me for my research, but he said he basically was letting me know that all of the 12 tribes are in West Africa. And I said, well, I agree with you. I said, you probably have a large portion of them that are with you, but obviously not all the tribes went to West Africa, or we wouldn't have tribes left in the northern kingdom and tribes left in the southern kingdom, right? And then you still had people in the time of Esther that had been taken to Babylon, and Esdras, which is his Hebrew name, the Greek name is Ezra, he brought a remnant of people back. They were released to do that by the Median king to rebuild the wall in Jerusalem, but not everybody left and came with them. Some of those still stayed, and these were then became what is known as the Iranian Jews. So my whole point is if you think, let me move on here if I have my map. Okay. If you think about the millions of Israelites, there were millions of Israelites. Polygamy was practiced by those that were wealthy enough. Torah did not say that polygamy was not allowed, but a man could have as many wives as he could care for. By Torah, by law, he had to make sure that every wife that he had food, clothing, housing, all of that. And so they were only allowed to have as many wives as they could care for. So it was probably mostly the wealthy or the kings. A lot of the kings from both the northern kingdom and the southern kingdom had many wives. And so, even Jacob had 4 wives. So if you think that there was millions of Israelites, they're not all, there was factions that broke off at different points in the history. And I'll speak a little bit more about the Ibu tribe. I did a little bit more investigating into them, and they have a very fascinating history, if I understood it correctly. I listened to an interview, but I will save that for when we get into the southern kingdom of Judah. But all that to say is, I'm sure there's remnants of the 12 tribes that are with the Ibu tribe in West Africa, and there's remnants of the 12, all 12 tribes that were in the southern kingdom of Judah because of those ones that came back down with the Levites. And then you had the ones that stayed in the northern kingdom, and they ended up being our Native American and indigenous peoples. So it's kind of all of the above. They all didn't just stick together and move together. You can't do that with millions and millions of people. Okay, so again, to the 2 ladies, all I can say is you need to understand this, and that you also have to understand how important the Apocrypha books are, because the Masoretes have cut so much out of our scriptures. So we have to have the Apocrypha books and some of what I call the extra biblical books to put some of the pieces back together. And those are the ones that tell us that they left Assyria, they left Hala and Habor and Gozan and went into Media. Okay, so I want to address that. So also in 2 Chronicles 15, talking about this is just another confirmation that some of those northern tribes did come back and stay in Judah. So it says, the Spirit of the Most High came upon Azariah, the son of Oded, and he went out to meet Asa and said to him, Hear me, Asa, and all Judah and Benjamin. The Most High is with you while you are with him. If you seek him, he will be found by you. But if you forsake him, he will forsake you. As soon as Asa heard these words, the prophecy of Azariah the son of Oded, he took courage and put away all the detestable idols from all the land of Judah and Benjamin and from the cities that he had taken in the hill country of Ephraim. And he repaired the altar of the Most High that was in front of the vestibule of the house of the Most High. And he gathered all of Judah and Benjamin and those from Ephraim, Manasseh, and Simeon who were residing with them, for great numbers had deserted to him from Israel when they saw that the Most High was with him. So, again, just another confirmation. Okay. So another interesting point, I had a gentleman talking to me about Samaria and, what was going on in Samaria and this and that. And I'm not sure if a lot of you know this, but when the northern tribes were removed from the northern kingdom and their capital city was Samaria, the Assyrians, let's just read. And the king of Assyria brought people, these were conquered people groups, okay, that were in slavery to the Assyrians. He brought people from Babylon, Cutha, Ava, Hamath, and Sepharvaim. Now that's not Sephirah, that's not Sephar. Sepharvaim is a different place. And placed them in the cities of Samaria instead of the people of Israel. And they took possession of Samaria and lived in its cities. And at the beginning of their dwelling there, they did not fear the Most High. Therefore, the Most High sent lions among them, which killed some of them. So the king of Assyria was told, the nations that you, the Gentile nations, that you have carried away and placed in the cities of Samaria, do not know the law of the Elohim of the land. Therefore, he has sent lions among them, and behold, they are killing them, because they do not know the law of the Elohim of the land. Then the king of Assyria commanded, send there one of the priests whom you carried away from there, and let him go and dwell there, and teach them the law of the Elohim of the land. Okay? So this is why in the New Testament, right, we're seeing that the southern tribe of Judah, there was this animosity. They were very disdainful and of the Samaritans and did not want to have anything to do with them. And so this is why, because these people in Samaria were from the Gentile nations, and they had basically had to convert to the Judean religion in order to keep from being killed and eaten by lions. So that was an answer to somebody else's question that asked me about Samaria. Like, I'm just giving you guys little tidbits of this and that. It's like we're doing a potluck tonight of information, okay? Doing a potluck. Now, remember I just mentioned to you that we had different Israelites moving to different places. There was a lot of moving, migration things going on. And we'll learn about the Lemba and some of the others too. Now, I stumbled upon this after I had already done the first 3 or 4 parts. I came across this, and it's fascinating. So there was a man by the name of Eldad, and he said he was from the tribe of Dan. And so I'm going to take the time to read this because I think you guys might find it fascinating. Our story, so this I got off of Chabad.org. Our story is about Eldad the Danite, and he called himself so because he claimed to belong to the tribe of Dan, which was one of the lost tribes of the Judean people. He became especially famous because he brought news of the lost tribes of Israel. You will remember that after the death of King Solomon, the land of Israel became divided into 2 kingdoms, the kingdom of Judah in the south, with Jerusalem as its capital, and the kingdom of the 10 tribes, sometimes called the northern kingdom, with Samaria as its capital, in the year 3202, what I would call Anno Mundi, the year of the world, or but they call it after creation, 3,202 years after creation. That is to say 135 years before the destruction of Beth Hamikdash. Shalmaneser, king of Assyria, invaded the northern kingdom and besieged Samaria. The capital of the 10 tribes fell 3 years later, and the 10 tribes were led into captivity to Assyria. Nothing was heard of the 10 tribes since then. And that was kind of the point of these 2 ladies. It's like they were dropped off here, and it says that we haven't heard from them anymore. Okay? But we know that's not the case. But it says, according to the story related by Eldad the Danite, who had it told to him by his ancestors, who in turn were told about it by their ancestors from generation back to generation back to those fateful days, the 10 tribes were not lost at all. Eldad the Danite related that his own tribe, the Danites, did not. So again, this is going to be a faction. This is going to be some of the Danites, not all, because we do know that Denmark in Scandinavia, right, that I found on old maps that used to be called Danmark. And then we also know that some of the tribe of Dan were up near the Arctic Circle in above Siberia. So these again are not all the Danites, but a large group of them. Okay, so keep in mind that as I read this. He says that Eldad related that his own tribe, the Danites, did not wait to be exiled. So basically they saw the writing on the wall, right? They could see what was coming. When the Assyrian Empire grew strong and mighty, they saw that there was no hope for them to remain free. Moreover, the kingdom of the 10 tribes was at war with the kingdom of Judah, and the Danites did not want to fight against their own brethren, so they decided to leave the land of Israel and find a safe place for themselves. It was in the 8th year of the reign of Ahaz of Judah, that is, in the year 3191 after creation, and 14 years before the fall of Samaria. So 14 years before, the Assyrians took everyone out. It says, the Danites took their wives and children, their sheep and cattle, and left the land of Israel. They went by way of Egypt, further down the upper Nile, and settled in Ethiopia, in East Africa. The Danites were great warriors, and after fighting many battles against native tribes, they established themselves securely with a kingdom of their own. Okay, so this is what the Chabad.org says. But I wanted to know, apparently Eldad had a diary. And so I found this diary on archive.org, and the publisher was the Jewish Quarterly Review in 1889. And just spoiler alert, this Eldad showed up around 880 or 883 AD. So that was only about, 100 and some odd years after, let's see, the remaining tribes were removed in 722 AD. So this Eldad shows up on the scene around 883 AD, I think, just to give you some perspective. Okay, I know you guys aren't going to be able to read that unless you take a screenshot and blow it up. But again, I found this on archive.org, and it's called Where Are the 10 Tribes? Eldad the Danite. So I printed it out because I can't see that. So I'm just going to read some of this because I think you're going to just find it utterly fascinating. In the name of the Most High, the Elohim of Israel, praised be the name of the King of Kings, the Holy One. Blessed be he who has chosen Israel, or Yasharel, out of all nations, who has given them the law, the Torah, which is the Torah, and the commandments, who has separated them from the 70 tongues, and who has ordered them to keep the 613 precepts. So long as Yasharel, or Israel, fulfilled the will of the Most High, no nation could subdue it, until Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, rose, sinned, and made Israel sin by making 2 golden calves. Then, so this is Eldad from Eldad's journal. This is him writing. I should probably have said that the rabbis had gotten a hold of, okay, which we now know the Jewish people have now, all these records. So until Jeroboam the son of Nebat rose, sinned, and made Israel sin by making 2 golden calves. Then the kingdom of the house of David divided, and Jeroboam gathered together the 10 tribes and told them, "Rise up and make war against Rehoboam in Jerusalem." They, however, answered, "Why should we fight against our brethren, against the son of our master David, the king of Israel and Judah?" The elders of Israel said, "There are no more valiant warriors in all the tribes of Israel than in the tribe of Dan." Therefore, Jeroboam ordered the children of Dan to make war against Judah. They, however, said, "By the life of our father's son, we will not fight against our brethren and shed their blood for nothing." And they gave themselves up to death took their swords, spears, and bows, and in order to make war against Jeroboam. But the Most High saved them from shedding the blood of their brethren. For they proclaimed throughout the whole tribe, saying, "Fly to Egypt!" And they took counsel to destroy Egypt and to kill all of its inhabitants. But their princes said to them, "How could you go to Egypt? Is it not written in the law, 'You shall see them again no more'?" Then they took counsel to fall upon Edom, Amalek, and Ammon, when they heard that it was written in the law that the Most High had forbidden Israel to possess their territory. And he references Deuteronomy 2, 9 and 17, 9, verse 9 and verse 17. Finally, the Most High gave them good courage and advice to go up the river Pishon, to continue their wandering on camels, and to encamp until they reached the land of Cush, Ethiopia, which they found fertile with numerous vineyards and gardens. The Danites settled here, making a covenant with the children of Cush, so the Ethiopians, that they should pay tribute to Israel. Thus the Danites dwelt here for many years, multiplying and increasing greatly. They were then followed by 3 other tribes, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, who crossed the desert and encamped until they came to the territory of the Danites. In their wanderings, they slew many Cushites in a territory extending 4 days' journey in each direction, and they have been fighting with 7 kingdoms up to this day. And these 4 tribes, Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher, and those who dwelt in the ancient Havilah, where there is gold, they trusted in the Most High, who helped them against the kingdom of, and I guess that's missing because it's just ... And these tribes put their hands on the neck of their enemies. And thus they do for the entire 3 months, when they return and bring all their spoil to the king Uzziel, who divides it amongst all Israel who dwell in the land, devoting a part of it to the Most High. The tribes of Naphtali, Gad, and Asher take each of them 3 months in turn. So it sounds like each tribe goes out on duty, like military duty, for 3 months, and then they come back, and then the next tribe. So they take 3-month intervals. There is also the tribe of Moshe, our just master, which is called the tribe which flees, because it fled from idol worship and clung to the fear of the Most High. A river flows around their land for a distance of 4 days' journey on every side. They dwell in beautiful houses, provided with handsome towers, which they built themselves. There is nothing unclean among them, neither in the case of birds, venison, or domesticated animals. There are no wild animals, no flies, no foxes, no vermin, no serpents, no dogs, and in general, nothing which does harm. They have only sheep and cattle, which bear twice a year. They sow and reap, and there are all sorts of gardens with all kinds of fruit and cereals, beans, melons, gourds, onions and garlic, wheat and barley, and the seed grows 100-fold. They have faith. They know the law and the Mishnah. They speak only Hebrew and are very strict as regards to the use of wine made by others than themselves, as well as the rules of slaughtering animals. In this respect, the law of Moses is much more rigorous than that of the tribes. They do not swear by the name of the Most High for fear that their breath may leave them, and they become angry with those who swear. They reprimand them, saying, "Woe, ye poor! Why do you swear with the mention of the name of the Most High upon your lips? Use your mouth for eating bread and drinking water. Do you not know that for the sin of swearing your children die young?" And in this way they exhort everyone to serve the Most High with fear and integrity of heart. Therefore the children of Moses, who was the servant of the Most High, live long to the age of 100 or 120 years. No child, be it son or daughter, dies during the lifetime of its parents, but they reach a third and fourth generation and see grandchildren and great-grandchildren with their offspring. They do all field work themselves. They have no male or female servants. There are also merchants among them. They do not close their houses at night, for there is no thief or any wicked man among them. Thus a little boy might go for days with his flocks, without fear of robbers, demons, or danger of any other kind. They are indeed all holy and clean. So these Levites, okay, so I need to come around over here. These Levites busy themselves with the law and with the commandments, and they still live in the holiness of our master Moses. Therefore, the Most High has given them all this good. Moreover, they see nobody, and nobody sees them, except for the 4 tribes who dwell on the other side of the rivers of Cush. They see them and speak to them, but the river Sambation is between them, as it is said, quote unquote, that thou mayest say to the prisoners, go forth. They have plenty of gold and silver. They sow flax to make linen. Linen is made from flax, in case you didn't know that. They cultivate the crimson worm and make beautiful garments. Their number is double or 4 times the number of those who went out from Egypt. The river Sambation is 200 yards broad, about as far as a bow shot. It's full of sand and stones, but without water. The stones make a great noise, like the waves of the sea and a stormy wind, so that in the night the noise is heard at a distance of half a day's journey. There are sources of water which collect themselves in one pool, out of which they water the fields, and there are fish in it, and all kinds of clean birds fly round about. And this river of stone and sand rolls during the 6 working days, and it rests on the Sabbath day. As soon as the Sabbath begins, fire surrounds the river, and the flames remain till the next evening when the Sabbath ends. Thus no human being can reach the river for a distance of half a mile on either side. The fire consumes all that grows there. The 4 tribes of Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher stand on the borders of the river. When shearing their flocks here, for the land is flat and clean without any thorns, when the children of Moses, so we're talking about the Levites, in case you haven't figured that out. So we have Dan, Naphtali, Gad, Asher, and then the Levites are nearby. But the Levites are kept separate. So it says, when shearing their flocks here, for the land is clean and flat, the children of Moses see them gathered together on the border, and they will shout, saying, Brethren, tribes of Jeshurun, show us your camels, dogs, and asses, donkeys, okay? And they make their remarks about the length of the camel's neck and the shortness of their tail. Then they greet one another and go on their way. So, let me see here. There's a lot more, but in the interest of time, I'll just let you, we'll go forth here. I did find this interesting. So you might, I'm also going to link this thing about Eldad in the description so you guys can read this as well. I think I'm already a little over an hour, so I have some other things I need to finish up. But one thing I did want to point out, do you remember last week when, was it last week? Yes, when I was talking about the Khazars and the king of the Khazars. And remember, we talked about Hazdai ben Shaprut, Hazdai son of Shaprut, and how he had written to King Joseph, the Khazarian king, because he'd heard about a Judean or Jewish kingdom. And he wrote to find out which one of the 12 tribes that Joseph was from, right? So what I found interesting here is Hasdai is mentioned here, which I think is interesting. It says, and here, and this is the other thing you guys have to realize. Hopefully you've noticed, like with Tobit and some of these others, your genealogy lineages matter, okay? And so this is how Eldad proved his genealogy, because he said, Eldad, son of Mali, son of Ezekiel, son of Hezekiah, son of Elon, son of Abner, son of Shemaiah, son of Hefer, son of Hur, son of Elkanah, son of Hillel, son of Ephraim, son of Tobiah, son of Pedath, son of Onan, son of Naaman, son of Taam, son of Tommy, son of Onam, son of Saul, son of Sheled, son of Caleb, son of Amram, son of Doros, son of Obadiah, son of Abraham, son of Joseph, son of Moses, son of Jacob, son of Kafir, son of Ariel, son of Asher, son of Job, and it goes on and on and on until he finally gets to the son of Hushim, which is the son of Dan, and Dan was the son of Jacob, our father. So by counting, this is actually brilliant because he's listing his whole pedigree, but if we also can get a feel for how much time has gone by when you count how many generations that is. So that's also very useful. And so anyway, it says here that these letters of Eldad were sent to Spain, which was Safar and Andalusia, in the year 883 AD. Eldad was full of the law and of the commandments, and if someone was sitting with him from morning to evening, his tongue would not cease from explaining the law, and he spoke only Hebrew. Okay, so these Danites and Asher, Naphtali, and Gad, and the Levites still had the Hebrew tongue. Okay. His words are sweeter than honey in the honeycomb. May the Holy One, blessed be He, give him a good reward in this world and the next. So it's fascinating. And so it says here that we find him at Kairouan and then in Spain about 883 AD, which they are saying is 4643 after creation. This date is not only fixed by manuscripts and the editions of Eldad's diary, but its correctness is also proved by the following passages in the letter of Prince Hasdai ben Shaprut, minister of Abdul Rahman in 940 AD, addressed to the king of the Khazars. Shaprut, or Hasdai, says, "And in the days of our fathers, a wise man of Israel fell in with us, of the tribe of Dan, whose pedigree reached back to Dan, the son of Jacob. He spoke pure Hebrew and gave a Hebrew name to each object, no matter what was hidden from him. And when he got up to teach a halakha, he introduced it with the words, Othniel, son of Kenaz, received it from Joshua, from Moses, from the Almighty." This passage refers no doubt as to our Eldad, who was in Andalusia in the time of Hasdai's grandfather. Okay, so Hasdai's grandfather would have met and known him when Eldad was in Safar and Andalusia. So I thought you guys might find that interesting. And there was one more thing here. I'm not going to read all of this, but I want you to notice what I have underlined in red. Okay? They do not, so it's talking about, then it says, I guess I am going to have to read this. It says, so Eldad had gone on a journey. Some things happened to him. He was taken prisoner. And then it says, on his journey, he fell in with the tribe of Issachar. So some of Issachar was there, who dwelled in the high mountains near the land of the Medes and the Persians. They keep saying, the book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth. It says, no worldly yoke is upon them, these are Issachar, but only that of heaven. They are not at war with anybody, but their energy is devoted to the discussion of the law. They are at peace with all and have no enemy. It says they inhabit a land extending 10 days' journey on every side. And then it goes down and it says, amongst them are fire worshippers who marry. So the fire worshippers apparently marry their mothers and sisters. They do not cultivate land or vineyards, but they do buy all for ready money. And this is interesting. It says, their judge and prince is called Nashon, and they use the 4 methods of capital punishment. They speak Hebrew, Persian, and Tatar, or that could also be Tartar, right? Where would we find the language of the Tartars? Tartaria, perhaps? So do you see this connection to these people living in Ethiopia, right? And like it's all tying it together with all of it that we've studied so far. And it says the children, and then it goes on where the children of Zebulun dwell. And I'm going to show you another chart that you can take a picture of. You really need to read this, but I thought this was interesting. It says each Sabbath, and then they talk about the tribe of Reuben behind the mountains of Paran. And it says they also speak Tartar or Tatar, and they possess the Bible, the Mishnah, and the Talmud, and the Aggadah. Each Sabbath they study the law, beginning with a Hebrew text and commenting on it in Tartar, okay? And then it looks like the tribes of Ephraim and Manasseh dwell in the southern mountains in the province of the fool, Muhammad. They are of a horrid mind and always on horseback, cut the roads, and they have no mercy upon any man. They have no other means of living than by spoil. They are valiant warriors, and one of them will vanquish 100. The tribe of Simeon and the other half of Manasseh are in the land of the Khazars and of infinite number. And they, meaning the Khazars, take tribute from 28 kingdoms, and many of the Ishmaelites also are subjected to tribute. So now all of a sudden, it has become a very small world here. Oh, and the other thing I realized, I'm going to go back here real quick. When I was reading about the Levites busy with the law, I forgot to mention, when they're talking about this river, Sambitan, and this full of sands and stones, it jogged my memory. When we had read in, I think it was part 2 about Prester John's letter, and remember, Prester John was also from Ethiopia, and before settling in Eastern Tartaria. In section 10, he says, Prester John said, in our territory is a certain waterless sea, which is exactly what Eldad is describing, consisting of tumbling billows of sand, never at rest. None have crossed the sea, it lacks water altogether. 3 days' journey from this waterless sea are mountains from which rolls down a stony, so stones, right? Waterless river which opens into the sandy sea. And it says, as long as the river is in motion, it cannot be crossed. And only 4 days a week is it possible to traverse it. So I'm trying to tie in loose ends here. So we have all of these tribes that originally were settled in Hala, Havilah, Gozan, right? They've then moved east to the cities of the Medes and the Persians, and except originally from the Danites and the others that were in Ethiopia. Okay, so they're all over, and then you've got some of Manasseh and who was that? Simeon. in the kingdom of the Khazars with some of the Ishmaelites. Okay, I'm going to stop there because this actually is ending up to be about, I don't know, almost 2.5, a little more, and I don't think that I'm going to be able to do that. So we're going to stop here, and then the remainder of it, I think I will do in like a bonus video, because I want to share this information before we move on to the next series. But I can't stick it all into this one. So I will release this, and then probably the next day I will release the bonus material. So be looking for a thumbnail or something that says bonus. Okay. Thank you so much for spending the last 2 hours with me. I hope you got your questions answered, and I hope you enjoyed hearing about Eldad the Danite and just more confirmation of everything we read about in part 2, and a little bit in mostly part 2, but somewhat of part 3. So have a wonderful rest of your week. Stay safe, stay well. I hope you're blessed, and take care. We'll see you very soon. Be watching out for the bonus video. Okay, bye-bye.